Hey, I'm Nate Savage, and welcome to this guitar lesson where we're going to talk about 5 tips to better picking. Now, I know that guitar picking technique is one of the more subjective things that we can talk about when it comes to playing the guitar, and everybody has their own opinion about it. So with that in mind, I'm going to stay away from any hard and fast rules and just give you some things that have helped me throughout the years that you can work on in your own practice time. The first tip we're going to go over kind of addresses the subjective part of picking technique, and the first tip is experiment. Experiment. And this is important because all of our bodies are different. Like physically, our anatomy is all different. And there are a lot of different guitar picking techniques out there that work really well that you can choose from. Some might work great for you, some might not. So it's really important to experiment with everything that you can to find out what works best for you. I have this area of experimentation broken down into 3 different areas. It's pick grip, picking angle, and the method for moving the pick. The first area that I mentioned is just pick grip, and there are a lot of different ways you can hold your pick when you're playing the guitar, right? You can use just your index finger and your thumb, and then have your index finger kind of pointing toward the guitar more. You can have that finger curled in like this. You can even use 2 fingers and then your thumb to hold the pick too. You're gonna have to experiment with this and see what's comfortable for you and see what works best for your own physical anatomy and your goals as a guitar player. The second kind of subjective area for picking technique that I want to talk about is picking angle. And to do that, I'm just going to bring up and compare some of my favorite rock guitar players so you can experiment with your own picking angle and find out what works best for you. Now, Marty Friedman, when he plays, he angles his pick at a really extreme upward angle like this. But it really works for him. He's a great player. Nobody can argue that that's not effective for him too. And also Sean Lane, one of the best guitar players of all time, in my opinion, had that same kind of upward pick slant or picking angle. And players like John Petrucci or Paul Gilbert use more of a downward picking angle. So mess around with those angles and see what kind of works best and what feels most natural for you. Now, the third subjective area of picking is your general method for moving the pick when you're playing the guitar. And let's just start from the smallest motion. A lot of people use just their fingers. From there, you can use your wrist. Some people use their whole arm. And then some people use kind of a combination of those, like a rotation kind of thing, almost like you're turning a doorknob, right? Still using my fingers, but I'm rotating my forearm a little bit as well. And also one little factor that comes in here is, am I letting my hand float free like this? Or am I using some kind of anchor point like my pinky or something on the body of the guitar? These are all very subjective parts of picking that you really need to experiment for yourself with. And there are a lot of resources out there for this kind of stuff if you want to dig deeper into it. One of the best things that I've found for experimenting with different picking techniques has been Troy Grady. So look him up on the internet. He does a way better job of going into this and analyzing it than I ever could. So he's something you really want to check out. Tip number 2 is to start with single strings. Now, one of the hardest parts about picking throughout a scale or a lick on the guitar is changing strings while you're picking. So if you can get rid of that challenge and just really focus your technique and your accuracy on one string, that's going to help you down the road. So take some time every day for a while and spend some time just picking on one string, then move to the next one and go through all 6 strings on the guitar because they all feel kind of different. So you could just start. Spend some time on your high E, then move to your B. And just do that on all 6 strings. If you want to take it even further, what you can do is work on just your downstrokes for a while. If you really want to get detailed with this, then work on your upstrokes for a while. And then put them together. Tip number 3 is to play slow and fast. Now, what I mean by that is this. When you're playing slow, you're programming your technique and all that subjective stuff that we talked about in tip 1 with the experimentation. You're programming that in. So play slow and make sure That's nailed down. But you're going to want to push yourself at some point if playing faster and picking faster is one of your goals. And there are a couple ways that I suggest that you can do this. The first one is to play slow. Just start picking on one string and gradually get faster and faster and faster, and then come back down, back to the original slow speed. And just keep doing that over and over again. The thing to remember here is to stay relaxed and focus on accuracy too. Now, the second way that you can really focus on playing slow and fast is to use a metronome and track your progress. Just start out at a slow BPM that you're really comfortable playing at, and then start pushing yourself, add 5 beats per minute. If you can play that, add 5 more, add 5 more, add 5 more, until you feel like you're really starting to push yourself. Tip number 4 is to work on changing strings. And by that, all I mean is working on changing between 2 adjacent strings with your picking. And this is kind of a problem area, or the hardest part of playing through scales or licks. And there are a couple things you can do to kind of isolate this challenge and really work on it. You can just pick 2 adjacent strings starting with a downstroke. Just practice that over and over again. Then you're going to want to start with the upstroke too, because it feels completely different. Once you have that initial coordination down, you're going to want to start applying this to scales or licks or something like that. So for the rest of this lesson, what we're going to do is use an E minor scale fragment, just 6 notes, and there are going to be 3 notes here on the B string and 3 notes here on the high E string, this one. And one thing that can help you get from string to string with your picking, besides just practicing the motions, is something called pick slanting. And this is something Troy Grady has covered really well. I really suggest that you check out his videos on that. The basic idea is that if I start out with a downstroke on this little scale fragment, and I angle my pick upward like this, check it out, down, up, down, the next upstroke is already primed right here to come right down on that high E string, instead of getting stuck in the strings right there, which is pretty cool. So slide the pick upward on the way up if you start with the downstroke. And that helps you change strings, right? Now, if you come back down the other way, you can slant the pick the other way towards the floor, and that'll help you come down too. So check it out. So slant upwards. And once you hit that upstroke, switch your picking slant and come back down the scale. So upward, switch to downward. And you'll notice when that happens, when I do that, I get this nice rolling motion instead of a hopping motion from string to string. That's one thing to really check out and really work on in your playing. It's really worth the effort. Another way of changing strings that you might want to experiment with is economy picking. And if you don't know what that is, I'll give you just a real quick example of it. Let's say I have that same scale. If I play down, up, down for the first 3 notes on the B string, I can continue that last downstroke into the high E string, the first note of the high E string. So down, up, down, down. That creates one less pick stroke to play 4 notes. And people call this either economy picking, some people call it sweep picking, but it is another valid way to get around the fretboard from string to string. Tip number 5 is to practice to music. A lot of guitar players fall in the trap of just practicing technique over and over again without ever really applying it to music. And when they get in a musical situation, they find themselves in trouble. So don't let that be you. There are a lot of ways that you can apply what you're working on to music. You can jam with friends, pull up a jam track and just try improvising over it, write a new song or a new riff, or just learn a new song or a new riff. There are all kinds of ways you can find to apply things to music. The important thing is that you use the skills that you're developing to make music and move forward with your musical goals, whatever those may be. To help you apply what you've learned in this lesson to music, I have a jam track for you. What you're going to want to do is pull this up and at first just work on the technique stuff we talked about. After that, work on getting that technique in a scale, and finally work on improvising throughout that scale and being as musical as you can. Here's an example of how you might use this in your daily practice. So just start slowly working on whatever technique you want to experiment with, right? Once you're comfortable with that, just work on single string practice, hop around strings, right? After that, you can play slow and fast. So start slow, speed it up. Once you're comfortable with that, start working on changing strings. That's it for this lesson on 5 tips to better picking. Now, again, there are tons of different techniques out there and we're all different. The biggest thing here is I would encourage you to experiment with everything you can find to find out what works for you and your own personal goals on the guitar. If you enjoyed this lesson and you want to see more like it, just like the video, leave a comment below, or visit guitarlessons.com for a lot more videos. I'll see you.